The gun in Elena Marsh's purse felt heavier than it should have as she stepped out of the black car and walked toward the church doors. In 3 minutes, she would marry a man she believed had ordered her father's death. She smoothed the front of her white dress, forced her lips into a soft smile, and told herself that revenge sometimes wore lace and pearls instead of a blade. 6 weeks earlier, her father, Walter Marsh, had been found dead in his office, and the police had called it an accident. Elena had not believed that for a single second. Walter had spent the last year of his life quietly investigating financial records linked to a name that made grown men lower their voices: Calloway. 2 nights before he died, he had told Elena on the phone that he had found something that could bring down an empire, and that she should trust no one connected to that name. Then the line had gone dead, and so, soon after, had he. Elena had grieved for exactly 1 week. Then she had done something her father never would have approved of. She had gone looking for the man at the top of the Calloway name, a man named Damon Calloway, and she had made certain that their paths crossed. Not by chance, by design. She had learned his routines, his favorite coffee shop, the charity gala he never missed, the private box he kept at the opera. She had appeared in each of those places at exactly the right moment, dressed to be noticed but never desperate, confident but never bold. Within 2 months, Damon Calloway, a man rumored to have half the city's officials in his pocket, was asking her to dinner. Within 4 months, he had asked her to marry him. Elena had said yes, and she had meant something entirely different by that word than he did. To her, marriage meant access. It meant a seat inside his house, his files, his secrets. It meant the chance to find proof of what he had done to her father and hand it to the one journalist in the city brave enough to publish it. She had built a wall around her heart, so thick that even she sometimes forgot what was behind it. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Damon Calloway had his own reasons for saying yes. Reasons that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with a promise made in a hospital room 3 years earlier, to a dying man named Edward Voss, a promise that Damon intended to keep even if it cost him everything. The church doors opened. The music began. Elena walked down the aisle toward the man she planned to destroy, and he watched her come toward him with an expression she could not read, something that looked almost like grief hiding behind a smile. The ceremony was short. Damon's family did not believe in long speeches or public displays of emotion. His mother sat in the front row, wearing sunglasses, despite the dim light of the church, and his younger sister Claire kept glancing at Elena with an expression that was part curiosity and part warning. When the priest asked Damon to say his vows, his voice was steady, but Elena noticed his hand trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. She told herself it meant nothing. Men like him did not tremble from love. They trembled from guilt. After the ceremony, there was no reception, no dancing, no celebration. Damon's driver took them straight to the estate on the edge of the city, a property surrounded by high stone walls and cameras that Elena counted, without trying to look like she was counting. 14 that she could see, probably more that she couldn't. Inside, the house was colder than she expected, both in temperature and in feeling. Marble floors, dark wood, portraits of Calloway ancestors staring down from the walls with the same guarded eyes as their descendant. A staff of 6 moved through the halls with quiet efficiency, never speaking unless spoken to. Damon led her to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, separate from his own, and told her this would be hers. He said it plainly, without apology, as if he expected her to be relieved rather than confused. "I thought we were married," Elena said, testing him. "We are," Damon answered. "That doesn't mean I expect anything from you that you don't want to give." It was not the answer of a man who had married for passion. It was the answer of a man keeping a distance on purpose. And Elena filed that detail away with all the others she was collecting, evidence not yet of a crime, but of a mystery she intended to solve. That night, she waited until the house went quiet, until the last set of footsteps faded down the hall, and then she rose from her bed and opened her bedroom door an inch at a time, testing for sound. The hallway was empty. She moved down it in bare feet, past closed doors, toward the stairs that led to Damon's private study, a room she had noticed him disappear into more than once during their short courtship. The study door was locked. Of course it was. She had expected that. What she had not expected was the man standing in the shadow of the staircase behind her, arms crossed, watching her with an expression that made her stomach drop. "Looking for something?" Damon asked. Elena's mind raced through a dozen lies before she settled on one. "I couldn't sleep. I wanted a book. The library is the other direction." His voice was calm, almost amused, but his eyes were sharp, cataloging her the way a man catalogs a threat. "This is my study. It stays locked, even for you." "Especially for me," Elena said, before she could stop herself. Something flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "You're perceptive," he said. "I like that. But perceptive people learn when to stop pushing." He walked past her, unlocked the door with a key from his pocket, stepped inside, and closed it behind him without another word, leaving Elena standing alone in the dark hallway, with her heart pounding, and her plan already unraveling faster than she had expected. She returned to her room, but did not sleep. Instead, she lay awake, replaying every second of the encounter, searching for what it meant. Damon Calloway was not behaving like a man who feared exposure. He was behaving like a man protecting something far more personal than criminal records, and that unsettled Elena more than open hostility would have. The next morning, she found Claire in the kitchen, sipping coffee and reading something on her phone with a small frown. Claire looked up when Elena entered and offered a smile that seemed more genuine than anything Elena had seen from this family so far. "You slept in the guest wing," Claire said. It was not a question. "Is that unusual?" "For my brother, everything about this marriage is unusual." Claire set down her phone. "He hasn't let anyone close in 3 years. Not since Edward died." Elena's pulse quickened at the unfamiliar name. Who was Edward? Claire's expression shifted, careful now, guarded, as if she had said more than she meant to. "Someone Damon loved like a brother. Ask him yourself, if you want the whole story. It isn't mine to tell." Before Elena could press further, Damon entered the kitchen, dressed for the day in a dark suit, his expression unreadable once more. He greeted his sister with a nod, and looked at Elena with something that might have been an apology for the night before, though he did not voice it. "I have business today," he said. "You're welcome to explore the house, just not the study." A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. "I'll have someone show you around properly, so you don't get lost looking for a book at midnight again." Claire hid a laugh behind her coffee cup. Elena forced her own smile and said nothing, filing away the name Edward alongside every other fragment of information she had gathered so far. She did not yet know how the pieces fit together. She only knew, with the same certainty that had driven her here in the first place, that they did fit together, and that the truth about her father's death was somewhere inside the walls of this house, waiting for her to find it. She spent the rest of the morning exploring the estate under the watchful eye of a member of the staff named Grace, a young woman with warm eyes and a guarded tongue who answered every question about the family with careful, practiced neutrality. Elena learned little of use, but she learned the layout of the house, the location of every camera she could spot, and the fact that the study was the only room on the ground floor that stayed locked at all times. That afternoon, alone in her room, Elena opened the small hidden compartment in her suitcase and removed the folder she had smuggled into the house, copies of her father's financial notes, the last things he had shown her before he died. She spread them across her bed and studied them again, searching for a name, a company, anything that connected directly to Damon Calloway. She found references to shell companies, offshore accounts, and payments routed through channels that led, eventually, to a name that was not Calloway at all, but a company called Voss Holdings. Elena stared at the name for a long moment, her breath caught in her throat. Voss, the same name Claire had spoken that morning, Edward Voss. The threads were beginning to connect, though not yet in any pattern she understood. Her father had not been investigating Damon Calloway directly. He had been investigating something, or someone, connected to a man named Edward Voss, a man who was already dead, a man Damon had loved like a brother. Whatever secret her father had uncovered, whatever had gotten him killed, it seemed to run through Edward Voss rather than through Damon himself. That realization complicated everything Elena thought she knew, and for the first time since she had begun this plan, she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. That evening, Damon returned home later than expected, his expression tight with a tension Elena had not seen before. He barely spoke through dinner, and when Elena asked, carefully, gently, whether something was wrong, he only shook his head and said, business had grown complicated. She watched him more closely after that, noting the way his eyes kept drifting to his phone, the way his jaw tightened every time it buzzed. Later that night, unable to sleep, Elena crept down to the kitchen for water and found Damon standing alone at the window, staring out at the dark grounds beyond the glass. He did not turn when she entered. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." A long silence stretched between them before he spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost unguarded. "There are things in this life you don't choose, promises you make when you're desperate, when someone you love is dying, and there's nothing else you can give them except your word. And then you spend years finding out just how heavy that word can be." Elena's heart pounded. She wanted, desperately, to ask him what he meant, to ask him about Edward Voss, and the promise Claire had hinted at, but something in his expression, raw and exhausted in a way she had never seen from him, stopped her. Instead, she stepped closer and said nothing at all, and for a moment, standing there in the dark kitchen with a man she had married to destroy, Elena Marsh felt something she had not expected to feel, the smallest, most dangerous flicker of sympathy. She pushed it down hard, reminded herself why she was there, and excused herself to bed, but she carried the weight of his words with her long into the night, turning them over and over, searching for the shape of the secret hidden inside them. The following days fell into a strange rhythm. Damon left early each morning and returned late each evening, distracted and tense, offering Elena only fragments of conversation and careful, distant courtesy. Elena used the time to study every corner of the house she was permitted to enter, learning the staff's schedules, the patterns of the guards who patrolled the grounds, and the exact moment each evening when the house grew quiet enough for her to move unseen. She had not forgotten her purpose. If anything, the mystery of Edward Voss only sharpened her resolve, because it meant there was more to uncover than she had first believed, more truth buried beneath the surface of this marriage than either of them had spoken aloud. On the fifth night, she tried the study door again, and found it locked as always, but this time she noticed something she had missed before, a small keypad hidden beneath the ornate door handle, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. A digital lock, in addition to the physical one. Whatever Damon kept behind that door, he protected it with more than simple caution. He protected it like a man guarding the truth of his entire life. Elena stood in the dark hallway, staring at that hidden keypad, and felt the first real thrill of the hunt since she had walked down the aisle 6 days earlier. Somewhere behind that door was the answer to everything: her father's death, Edward Voss, the promise Damon had made and could not escape. She did not yet have the code. She did not yet have proof of anything, but she had confirmation, finally. Those secrets were real, and she intended to find every single one of them, no matter what it cost her, and no matter what it revealed about the man she had married to destroy. As she turned to make her way back to her room, a floorboard creaked behind her, and she froze, certain for one terrible moment that she had been caught again. But when she turned, the hallway was empty, and only the portraits of long-dead Callaways stared back at her from the walls, silent witnesses to a truth that even they, perhaps, had never fully understood. Elena returned to her room, closed the door softly behind her, and sat on the edge of her bed with her heart still racing. Whatever waited behind that locked study door, she was closer to it now than she had been 6 days ago. And somewhere in the house around her, a man slept, or did not sleep, carrying a secret heavy enough to build a marriage around, heavy enough, perhaps, to have cost her father his life. The war between them, though neither had spoken its true terms aloud, had truly begun. The keypad haunted Elena for 3 days before she found her opportunity. She had watched Damon enter the study a dozen times since discovering the hidden lock, always shielding his hand with his body, always closing the door before she could see more than a flash of movement. But on the third night, a call pulled him away from the house entirely, urgent and unexplained, and he left in a hurry that gave Elena no time to ask questions, only a hurried apology and a promise to return before morning. The moment his car disappeared down the long driveway, Elena moved. She had spent those 3 days memorizing the pattern of the night guards, learning that the 2 men stationed near the east wing took a 15-minute break every night at exactly 11, retreating to the kitchen for coffee and quiet conversation. She had also spent those 3 days watching Damon's hands from a distance, catching, on the second night, 3 digits of the 6-digit code before he blocked the rest with his shoulder. 3 digits were not a code, but they were a start. At 11 that night, with the guards gone from the hallway and the house wrapped in silence, Elena knelt in front of the study door and began to work. She tried combinations built around the 3 numbers she had seen, arranging and rearranging them, with the last 3 digits guessed from dates she had gathered from staff conversations, birthdays, anniversaries, the day perhaps that Edward Voss had died. Her hands shook, her breath came shallow and fast. On the 7th attempt, the small light above the keypad turned green, and the lock released with a soft click that felt, in that silent hallway, as loud as a gunshot. Elena pushed the door open and stepped into a room unlike anything else in the house. Where the rest of the estate was cold and formal, this room was lived in, cluttered with papers, photographs, and a single leather chair, worn soft from years of use. A large corkboard covered one wall, pinned with newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs of a man Elena did not recognize. A man with kind eyes and an easy smile that seemed to belong to a different world than the Calloway estate. Edward Voss. She knew it the moment she saw his face, though she had never met him. He appeared in photograph after photograph beside a much younger Damon, the 2 of them laughing on a boat, standing together at what looked like a graduation, sitting side by side in what appeared to be a hospital room, Edward pale and thin, in a way that made Elena's chest tighten with unexpected grief, for a man she had never known. She moved closer to the corkboard, and her breath caught entirely when she found, pinned near the center, a photograph of her own father. Walter Marsh, younger, standing beside Edward Voss with his arm around the other man's shoulders, both of them smiling in front of a building she recognized as the offices of a company that no longer existed, a company that had closed its doors nearly a decade earlier, under circumstances Elena had never fully understood. Beside the photograph was a note in handwriting she now recognized as Damon's, small and precise. It read simply, "Walter kept his word. I will keep mine." Elena's mind raced, trying to piece together what she was seeing. Her father and Edward Voss had known each other, had worked together, long before Damon Calloway had ever entered either of their lives. Whatever debt existed between the Calloway family and her own, it had not begun with her father's death. It had begun years earlier, in ways she was only now beginning to glimpse. She moved to the desk beneath the window and found it unlocked, papers scattered across its surface. Among them, she found a letter, folded and worn from handling, dated 3 years earlier, written in shaking handwriting that could only have belonged to a dying man. "Damon," the letter began, "if you are reading this, I am already gone, and I need you to do something for me that I never had the courage to ask while I was alive. Walter Marsh saved my life once, in ways I never told you, in ways that cost him more than either of us understood at the time. He has a daughter. Her name is Elena. She does not know what her father did for me, and she must never know the details, because the truth would put her in more danger than she can imagine. All I ask is that you watch over her, protect her, from a distance if you must, closely if you can. I know I am asking you to carry a burden that is not yours. But you are the only man I trust to carry it well. Keep my promise for me, Damon. Keep her safe." Elena read the letter twice, her hands trembling so hard the paper shook audibly in the silent room. Everything she believed about why Damon had married her, everything she had built her plan around, crumbled in the space of those few sentences. He had not married her to silence a threat. He had married her to protect a promise made to a dying man, a promise tangled somehow with her own father's past, a past Elena herself knew almost nothing about. She heard the front door open downstairs, the sound of footsteps in the entryway, and her heart lurched into her throat. Damon was home early. She had, at most, a minute before he reached the second floor, and she was standing in the one room in the entire house he had explicitly forbidden her to enter, holding a letter that would reveal everything she had learned. Elena moved fast, replacing the letter exactly where she had found it, straightening the papers on the desk, backing toward the door with her pulse hammering in her ears. She slipped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind her, just as Damon's footsteps reached the top of the stairs. She had no time to relock the digital keypad. She barely had time to step back and press herself against the wall in the shadow of a large portrait, praying the darkness would hide her. Damon reached the top of the stairs and stopped. He looked directly toward the study door, and for one horrifying moment, Elena was certain he could see the faint glow of the keypad, still unlocked, still betraying her presence. But instead of moving toward the door, he simply stood there, exhausted, his shoulders slumped in a way she had never seen from him, and pressed his palm flat against the wood, as if drawing strength from the room beyond it. "I'm trying, Edward," he said quietly, to no one, to the empty hallway, to a man 3 years dead. "I'm trying to keep it." Elena held her breath until he finally turned and walked toward his own bedroom, disappearing behind a closed door, without ever noticing her in the shadows. She remained frozen for a long moment before finally allowing herself to breathe, her mind spinning with everything she had just learned. She returned to her room that night, carrying more questions than answers. Her father had known Edward Voss. Her father had done something for him, something significant enough to inspire a dying man's final wish. And Damon Calloway, the man she had married to destroy, had spent 3 years silently carrying the weight of a promise that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with loyalty. None of it explained why her father had died. None of it explained the financial records he had been investigating in the final months of his life, the shell companies and offshore accounts that had led her, eventually, to Voss Holdings. If Damon had genuinely been protecting her all along, then who had killed her father, and why? Elena lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the careful architecture of her revenge beginning to collapse beneath the weight of a truth far more complicated than the one she had arrived with. She thought of Damon's voice in the empty hallway, the rawness in it, the exhaustion of a man who had spent years fighting a war she had known nothing about. She thought of her father's photograph on that corkboard, young and smiling beside a man who would later beg for his daughter's protection with his dying breath. For the first time since her father's death, Elena did not know who her enemy truly was, and that uncertainty frightened her more than any locked door ever had. The next morning, she found Damon in the kitchen earlier than usual, dark circles under his eyes, a cup of coffee cooling untouched in front of him. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression had shifted overnight, something quieter, more open than she had seen from him before. "I need to tell you something," he said, before she could speak. "About why I married you." Elena's heart pounded as she took the seat across from him, bracing herself for a truth she was no longer certain she wanted to hear, and yet could not bring herself to refuse. "I'm listening," she said. But instead of continuing, Damon's phone buzzed sharply on the table between them, and his face changed the moment he read the message, all the quiet openness vanishing, replaced by something hard and alert. "Later," he said, rising abruptly from his chair. "I promise you, later. Something's happened. I have to go." He left without further explanation, leaving Elena alone in the kitchen, with a growing dread settling into her chest. Whatever secret Damon had been about to share, it would have to wait, because somewhere beyond the walls of the estate, trouble was already moving toward them, and neither of them yet understood how close it truly was. Damon did not return that day, nor did he call. Elena spent the hours pacing the halls of the estate, her mind cycling endlessly between the letter she had read in the study and the abrupt fear that had crossed his face at breakfast. By evening, Claire found her in the library, staring blankly at a book she had not turned a page of in over an hour. "You've heard nothing either," Claire said, settling into the chair across from her. It was not a question. "Should I be worried?" Claire hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "There's a man named Victor Doyle. He used to work with our father, years ago, before Damon took over the business. Victor believes the territory that came to Damon should have come to him instead. He's spent years circling, waiting for a weakness. I think he may have found one." "What weakness?" Claire's eyes flicked toward her, something unreadable in them. "You should ask my brother that. It isn't my place." That night, Damon finally returned, well past midnight, moving through the front door with the careful stiffness of a man in pain. Elena, still awake, heard the commotion from the top of the stairs and rushed down to find him leaning against the wall of the entryway, a dark stain spreading across the sleeve of his jacket, his driver hovering anxiously nearby. "It's nothing," Damon said, waving off her alarm even as his face went pale. "A disagreement that got out of hand. You're bleeding." "I'm aware." Elena did not argue further. She simply took his good arm, guided him toward a chair in the sitting room, and began cutting away the ruined fabric of his sleeve with a pair of scissors from a nearby drawer, while the driver called for a doctor the family clearly trusted more than any hospital. Beneath the jacket, a wound crossed his upper arm, shallow but ugly, clearly the result of a blade rather than anything worse. Elena pressed a clean towel against it, her hands steadier than she expected them to be, and Damon watched her work with an expression of quiet surprise. "You're not asking questions," he said. "I'm asking plenty. I'm just choosing which ones matter most right now." She met his eyes. "Who did this?" "A man named Victor Doyle sent people to remind me that peace in this city is fragile." Damon winced as she tightened the towel. "He's wanted my territory for a long time. He's grown bolder lately, and I don't yet understand why. Claire mentioned him. She said you had a weakness." Something flickered across Damon's face, guilt layered over exhaustion. "She meant you." Elena went still. "Me?" "A marriage built quickly, to a woman with no connections to this world, no protection of her own, no family left to warn her away. To men like Victor, that looks like something to exploit. A door left slightly open." He closed his eyes briefly. "I should have told you the danger you were walking into before you said yes at that altar." "You didn't force me to say yes," Elena said quietly, and immediately regretted the flicker of guilt that rose in her own chest at the words, because she, too, had walked into this marriage with a hidden purpose, a purpose that suddenly felt small and reckless compared to the danger circling them both. The doctor arrived soon after, tended to the wound properly, and left with quiet instructions for rest. Damon, stubborn as ever, refused to go to bed until he had said what he had started to say that morning, before his phone had interrupted him. "I married you because of a promise," he said, once they were alone again, his voice low and rough with exhaustion. "A friend of mine, Edward Voss, died 3 years ago. Before he died, he asked me to protect a woman I had never met, the daughter of a man named Walter Marsh, a man who had once saved his life in ways I still don't fully understand. He never told me the details. He only told me it mattered more than anything else he could ask of me." Elena's chest tightened. The truth she had already glimpsed in the study now spoken aloud, confirmed. "You're talking about my father." Damon nodded slowly. "I spent 3 years trying to find a way to keep that promise without upending your life, watching from a distance, making sure nothing happened to you. And then your father died, suddenly, under circumstances that never sat right with me, and I realized distance wasn't protection at all. It was a risk I could no longer afford to take, so I found a way to bring you close enough to protect properly." He looked away, ashamed. "I never meant to fall in love with you doing it. That wasn't part of the plan." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, and for a long moment, she could not speak at all. Everything she had believed, every carefully built assumption about the man in front of her, collapsed entirely, replaced by something far messier and far more real. He had not married her out of cruelty or convenience. He had married her out of a devotion so deep it had cost him blood tonight, and very nearly his life. And she had married him to destroy him. The weight of her own deception pressed down on her chest until she thought she might be sick with it. She wanted, desperately, to tell him everything, the demaca of financial records she had hidden in her suitcase, the plan she had built in the weeks after her father's death, the version of herself that had walked down that aisle, intending only harm. But the words would not come, not yet, not while the truth was still so raw and dangerous between them. "Why would my father need saving in the first place?" she asked instead, seizing on the one thread that might lead her somewhere useful. "What did he do for Edward?" Damon shook his head slowly. "Edward never told me. He only said it cost your father more than anyone understood. I've spent 3 years trying to find the answer myself, and I've never gotten close." His eyes met hers, weary and searching. "Do you know anything?" Anything at all he might have told you before he died? Elena thought of the financial records hidden upstairs, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the name Voss Holdings buried among documents her father had gathered in the final months of his life. She thought of the danger Claire had warned her about, the weakness Victor Doyle believed he had found, and she made a decision in that moment that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I might, she said. I have some of his research, papers he was working on before he died. I didn't understand what they meant until tonight. Damon straightened, despite his injury, alert now, in a way that cut through his exhaustion entirely. Show me. Elena led him upstairs to her room and retrieved the folder from its hidden compartment, spreading the papers across the small table by the window while Damon studied each page with the focused intensity of a man finally seeing a puzzle take shape. He pointed to the references to Voss Holdings, to the offshore accounts, to a pattern of payments that repeated across nearly a decade. This isn't Edward's money, Damon said slowly, piecing it together aloud. Edward never had this kind of wealth. Someone was moving money through his company, using his name, using accounts your father must have discovered while working for him. He looked up at Elena, understanding dawning across his face. Your father didn't just work with Edward. He uncovered something. Something someone else needed hidden badly enough to bury it for years, and then to bury the man who found it. You think that's why he died? Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think it's very possible your father wasn't killed because of anything to do with my family at all, Damon said. I think he was killed because he found evidence of something that had nothing to do with the Callaways, and everything to do with whoever was using Edward's company to hide it. He paused, his jaw tightening. And I think Victor Doyle's sudden aggression, right as this evidence surfaces, is not a coincidence. Elena's mind raced through the implications, the careful architecture of her plan crumbling further with every new piece of the puzzle. She had come into this marriage certain of one truth, that Damon Calloway had ordered her father's death. Now that truth had dissolved entirely, replaced by something far more dangerous, an enemy neither of them had fully identified yet, an enemy who had already killed once, and who might now see both of them as threats worth eliminating. There's something else you should know, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly as she finally reached for the confession she had been avoiding all night. I didn't marry you because I wanted to. I married you because I believed you had my father killed. I came into this house planning to find proof of it and use it against you. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy between them. Damon's expression did not shift into anger, as she had feared it might. Instead, something like understanding crossed his face, weary and unsurprised. I know, he said quietly. Elena's breath caught. You know? I've known for weeks. I found the compartment in your suitcase the second week you were here, while you were out with Grace. I didn't say anything because I understood why you'd think it. Every piece of evidence pointed toward my family, because whoever set this up wanted it to. He met her eyes steadily. I let you keep looking, because part of me hoped you'd find the truth before I had to tell you myself. Elena stared at him, stunned by the quiet grace in his admission, the complete absence of the fury she had braced herself for. You should hate me. I should, he agreed, but I don't. I understand grief. I understand what it does to the shape of a person's thinking. You weren't wrong to look for the truth, Elena. You were only wrong about where to find it. His hand found hers across the small table, careful, tentative. Now we look together. Whoever did this to your father used my family's name as a shield. That makes it my fight as much as yours. Outside, the wind picked up against the windows, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the estate's high walls, a man named Victor Doyle sat in a room of his own, reviewing reports of a failed attack and already planning the next one, unaware that the two people he had hoped to divide had, instead, just become allies bound by a truth larger than either of them had understood when this marriage began. The following morning, Damon called a meeting with the few people he trusted most, Claire, his longtime advisor Nathan, and Elena herself, gathered around the same desk in the study Elena had once broken into under cover of darkness. This time, the door stood open, and she sat at Damon's side by invitation rather than deception. We need to know who's really been using Voss Holdings, Damon said, spreading Walter's documents across the desk. Someone built an entire financial pipeline through Edward's company, years before he died, and kept using it after. Whoever that is, they killed Walter Marsh to protect it, and now they're moving against us to protect it further. Nathan, a quiet man with sharp eyes, studied the documents carefully before speaking. I recognize this account structure. I've seen fragments of it before, in dealings connected to Victor Doyle's territory. If I'm right, this isn't just financial fraud. This is the foundation Victor has used to fund his entire operation for the past several years. The room fell silent as the pieces clicked into place. Victor Doyle was not simply a rival seeking territory out of ambition. He was a man protecting a decade-long secret, a hidden financial empire built on stolen identity and buried evidence. An empire that Walter Marsh had stumbled upon and paid for with his life. An empire that now threatened everyone connected to its discovery. Then we don't just need proof for the police, Damon said, his voice hardening with resolve. We need enough evidence to end him entirely, before he decides the two of you know too much to let live. Elena looked around the room, at Claire's steady determination, at Nathan's careful focus, at Damon's fierce and unexpected protectiveness, and felt something shift inside her chest, the last remnants of her lonely, isolated grief giving way to something new, the first real hope she had felt since her father's death, that the truth might finally be within reach, and that she would not have to find it alone. 3 days after the meeting in the study, a package arrived at the estate with no return address, delivered by hand to the front gate, and left without a word from whoever had carried it. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a single photograph and a note written in block letters: "Stop digging, or the next thing you find will be a grave." The photograph showed Elena leaving the estate 2 days earlier, taken from a distance with a long lens, her face clearly visible despite the blur of movement. Someone had been watching the house. Someone had been watching her. Damon's reaction was immediate and cold, a fury Elena had not yet seen from him, controlled, but unmistakable beneath the surface. He called Nathan within minutes, doubled the guard around the estate by nightfall, and forbade Elena from leaving the grounds without an escort of at least 2 men, an order she did not argue against, despite the flicker of frustration it stirred in her. "This confirms it," Damon said, pacing the length of the study with the photograph still in his hand. "Victor knows we're looking. He's trying to scare us into stopping before we find enough to bury him." "Then we don't stop," Elena said. "We move faster." Over the following week, the 3 of them, Damon, Elena, and Nathan, worked late into every night, cross-referencing Walter's financial records against Nathan's knowledge of Victor's operation, slowly building a picture of a decade-long fraud hidden inside Edward Voss's old company. Payments that should have gone toward legitimate business ventures had instead been funneled into shell accounts controlled by Victor, laundered and redirected to fund an expansion of territory that Victor had spent years disguising as legitimate growth. Walter Marsh, it became clear, had been hired years earlier as an outside auditor for Edward's company, brought in specifically because of his reputation for honesty and thoroughness. He had discovered the fraud almost immediately, but rather than exposing it right away, he had chosen to quietly gather evidence over months, hoping to build a case strong enough to protect Edward's reputation while dismantling whoever was truly responsible. He had gotten close, too close, and Victor, sensing the danger, had struck first. He was protecting Edward, Elena realized aloud one night, staring at the timeline they had built across the study wall. "That's why Edward asked Damon to protect me. He knew, or suspected, what my father had done for him, even if he never understood the full extent of it. He knew the danger my father had walked into on his behalf. And he knew that danger might eventually reach you too," Damon added quietly. The revelation settled over Elena with a complicated mixture of grief and pride. Her father had died protecting a friend's reputation and uncovering a crime that stretched far beyond anything she had imagined when she first walked into this marriage, seeking revenge against the wrong man entirely. The weight of that truth reshaped everything she thought she understood about the last year of his life. But knowledge alone would not be enough to stop Victor Doyle. They needed proof solid enough to bring to the authorities, proof that could not be dismissed or buried the way Victor had buried every trace of his fraud for nearly a decade. And Nathan, after days of careful research, believed he knew exactly where to find it. Victor keeps a private ledger, Nathan explained, spreading a rough sketch of a building across the desk. Physical records, kept off any network, stored in a private office at his warehouse on the east side of the docks. If Walter's documents are the trail, that ledger is the proof. Names, dates, every account he's ever used to move stolen money. If we can get our hands on it, we can end this permanently. And if we can't, Damon said grimly, Victor keeps his empire, and he keeps coming after us until he finishes what he started with Walter. The plan they built over the following days was careful and dangerous, relying on Nathan's knowledge of the warehouse's security patterns. A narrow window each night, when the guard rotation left a single unmonitored entrance, and Elena's insistence, despite Damon's fierce objection, that she be part of the team that retrieved the ledger herself. You don't have to prove anything to me, Damon told her privately, the night before the plan was set to unfold. You've already proven everything I need to know about you. This isn't about proving anything, Elena said. This is about finishing what my father started. He spent months building a case he never got to present. I want to be the one who finishes it, not someone watching from a distance while other people risk everything on my behalf. Damon studied her for a long moment, and whatever resistance remained in his expression finally gave way to something like respect. Then we finish it together. The night of the operation arrived cold and clear, the docks quiet, except for the distant sound of water against the pilings, and the occasional call of a passing gull disturbed from its rest. Elena moved through the shadows beside Damon and two of his most trusted men, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination she had not felt since the night she had broken into the study weeks earlier. Nathan's information proved accurate. The guard rotation left exactly the gap he had promised, a narrow window of no more than 8 minutes during which the side entrance to the warehouse stood unmonitored. They moved through it quickly and silently, Damon leading the way with the confidence of a man who had spent years navigating exactly this kind of danger, Elena following close behind, with a flashlight shielded against her palm. The private office was located exactly where Nathan's sketch had indicated, secured behind a door far less fortified than the one Elena had once broken into in Damon's own study. Inside, a heavy safe sat bolted to the floor beneath a desk cluttered with paperwork that meant nothing without the combination Nathan had spent days trying, unsuccessfully, to crack. We don't have time to guess, Damon said, checking his watch with visible tension. 4 minutes left in the window. Elena's mind raced, searching for anything that might help, and then, unexpectedly, she remembered a detail from her father's old files, a date that had appeared repeatedly among his notes, circled twice in his own careful handwriting. She had assumed it was simply the date he had first discovered the fraud. Now, staring at the safe, she wondered if it might mean something more. Try this, she said, reading the date aloud, converting it quickly into the 6-digit format the lock required. Damon entered the numbers with steady hands, and the safe's lock released with a soft mechanical click that felt, in that tense silence, like the loudest sound in the world. Inside, exactly as Nathan had promised, sat a thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with years of careful, damning records. Damon lifted it free, just as a sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Footsteps, unhurried, moving in their direction. Their window had closed faster than expected. "Move," Damon whispered, and the group slipped back through the side entrance, just as a beam of flashlight swept across the space they had occupied only seconds before, the ledger secured safely against Damon's chest as they disappeared into the darkness beyond the warehouse walls. They did not stop moving until they reached the car waiting 3 streets away, and only once they were safely inside, doors locked, engine humming quietly beneath them, did Elena finally allow herself to breathe fully again. Damon reached over and took her hand, his grip firm and grounding, and in his eyes, she saw not just relief, but something deeper, a recognition that they had just crossed a threshold together that neither of them could take back. "We have it," he said quietly. "We actually have it." Elena looked down at the ledger resting between them, at the years of hidden crime it contained, at the proof that would finally explain her father's death and expose the man responsible for it. For the first time since Walter Marsh had died, she felt something close to peace settling over the grief she had carried alone for so long. But peace, she knew even then, would have to wait. Victor Doyle would not simply accept the loss of his ledger quietly. Somewhere in the city, he was surely already realizing what had been taken, and men like him did not respond to loss with resignation. They responded with retaliation, swift and merciless, and Elena understood, as the car sped through the dark streets back toward the estate, that the most dangerous part of this fight had not yet begun. Victor Doyle discovered the theft of his ledger before dawn, and by sunrise, the entire city felt the shift, whispers moving through the underworld faster than any official statement could travel. Nathan's contacts reported unusual activity across Victor's territory within hours, men mobilizing, meetings called in secret, attention rippling outward from the docks like the aftershock of an earthquake. Damon spent the morning at the estate, reviewing the ledger with a lawyer he trusted completely, a woman named Grace Bennett, who had handled sensitive Callaway matters for over a decade, and who confirmed, after hours of careful review, that the evidence inside was more than sufficient to bring formal charges against Victor Doyle for fraud, money laundering, and, with the right cooperation from investigators already suspicious of Walter Marsh's death, potentially even murder. "This is enough," Grace told them, closing the ledger carefully. "More than enough. But moving forward means moving publicly. The moment we file this, Victor will know exactly who took it from him, and he'll know he has nothing left to lose." Elena understood the warning immediately. A man protecting a hidden empire might strike carefully, quietly, in the shadows. A man watching that empire collapse entirely had no reason left for caution. "Then we don't give him time to plan a response," Damon said, his jaw tight with resolve. "We move today." The plan they built that afternoon relied on speed and coordination, Grace preparing the formal filing, while Nathan reached out quietly to a detective within the department known for refusing bribes, a rare and valuable ally in a city where corruption often ran deeper than the law itself. By evening, the wheels were in motion, evidence secured with the authorities, warrants being quietly prepared, the slow machinery of justice finally beginning to turn against a man who had evaded it for nearly a decade. But justice, Elena would soon learn, rarely arrived without one final confrontation. Victor Doyle received word of the filing within hours, exactly as Damon had predicted, and his response came not through official channels, but through the only language he had ever truly trusted: force. That night, as the estate settled into what should have been a rare moment of relief, a call came through to Damon's phone, from a number he did not recognize. Elena watched his face change as he listened, the color draining from it in a way that filled her with immediate dread. "What is it?" she asked, the moment he lowered the phone. "Victor has Claire," Damon said, his voice barely steady. "He took her from outside her apartment an hour ago. He wants the ledger, and he wants it delivered personally, alone, tonight, or he says he'll make sure I understand exactly what I've cost him." The room fell into stunned silence. Elena's mind raced through every possibility, every risk, every terrible outcome that could unfold from a trade like the one Victor demanded. She saw immediately what Damon already understood. Walking into that meeting alone meant walking into a trap with almost no chance of walking back out. "You can't go alone," she said. "I don't have a choice," he said alone, "and if he sees anyone else, he'll hurt her before I even get close." Damon was already moving, checking the weapon he kept locked in a drawer of the study, his hands steady despite the fear radiating from every line of his body. "I'm not losing my sister the way I nearly lost you to Victor's warning." "Then let me help you think," Elena said, grabbing his arm and forcing him to stop, to look at her. "He wants the ledger delivered alone. He didn't say the plan for getting Claire back has to end the moment you hand it over. We can still protect you both, if we're smart about it." It was Nathan who finally proposed the solution, drawing on years of experience navigating exactly this kind of dangerous exchange. They would create a copy of the ledger's most damning pages, detailed enough to satisfy Victor in the darkness of a hurried meeting, while Grace secured the original safely with the authorities, ensuring that even if the exchange went wrong, the evidence itself remained protected. Meanwhile, Nathan and two of his most trusted men would position themselves at a distance from the meeting point, close enough to intervene the moment Claire was safely clear of danger, far enough to remain unseen by Victor himself. Elena, despite fierce resistance from Damon, insisted on being present as well, positioned nearby with Nathan's team, unwilling to remain safely behind at the estate, while the people she had come to care for walked into danger on her behalf. "If something happens to him," she told Nathan quietly, as they prepared to leave, "I need to be close enough to help. I've already lost one person I love to secrets and silence. I won't lose another one that way." The meeting point Victor had chosen was an abandoned pier on the edge of the docks, chosen deliberately, Elena suspected, for its isolation and its distance from any easy escape route. Damon arrived exactly on time, the false ledger held visibly in one hand, his posture radiating a calm he could not possibly have felt beneath the surface. Victor emerged from the shadows flanked by two men, Claire held roughly between them, her wrists bound, but her expression fierce and unbroken, despite the danger surrounding her. Even from a distance, hidden with Nathan's team behind a stack of shipping containers, Elena could see the fury barely contained in Damon's posture as he took in his sister's condition. "You brought it," Victor said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet dock. "Smart. I was starting to think the Calloway name had lost its sense." "Let her go first," Damon said. "Then you get the ledger." Victor laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "That's not how this works. The ledger comes to me, then she walks free. Try anything clever, and I promise you'll be burying her next to your friend's old business partner." The exchange that followed unfolded with agonizing slowness. Damon stepping forward carefully, the ledger extended, Victor's men watching every movement with weapons visible, but not yet raised. Elena's heart pounded so hard she was certain it could be heard across the water, every instinct screaming at her to move, to act, to do something beyond simply watching from the shadows. It was Nathan's steady hand on her arm that kept her still, his whispered reminder that timing mattered more than instinct in a moment like this, that one wrong move could cost Claire her life before help ever arrived. Victor took the ledger, flipping through its pages with a satisfied nod, apparently convinced by the detail Nathan and Grace had carefully constructed. "Release her," he told his men, and for one breathless moment, it seemed the exchange might conclude exactly as planned. Claire walking free, danger finally passing. But Victor's satisfaction shifted the moment he flipped to the final pages, pages deliberately left incomplete, missing the crucial account numbers that would have made the copy as damning as the original. His expression darkened instantly. "This is incomplete," he snarled, snapping the ledger closed. "You think I wouldn't notice? Where's the rest of it?" "Somewhere safe," Damon said, his voice hardening. "Somewhere it stays, unless Claire walks free right now." Victor's fury ignited fast and dangerous, his men raising their weapons in response to his shift in mood, and Elena felt the entire plan teeter on the edge of collapse. This was the moment Nathan had warned her about, the moment where hesitation could cost everything. She did not hesitate. Before Nathan could stop her, Elena stepped forward from behind the containers, drawing every eye on the pier toward her, including Victor's. "The rest is with the police," she called out, her voice carrying steady and clear across the water, despite the fear coursing through her. "It's already been filed. This is over, Victor. Whatever you do here tonight, it doesn't change that. It only adds to the charges waiting for you." The distraction was exactly enough. In the half-second that Victor's attention split between Elena and Damon, Nathan's men moved, closing the distance from the shadows with practiced speed, and Claire, seizing the opening, wrenched free of the man holding her, and ran toward her brother's outstretched arms. What followed happened in a blur, Nathan's team subduing Victor's men before weapons could be raised again, Damon pulling Claire behind him protectively, Victor himself frozen for one final moment of disbelief, before realizing the empire he had spent a decade protecting had truly, finally, collapsed around him. By the time the true authorities arrived, alerted by Grace exactly as planned, Victor Doyle stood surrounded, the fight gone out of him entirely, the weight of a decade's hidden crimes finally catching up to the man who had built an empire on stolen money and silenced truth. Elena stood at the edge of the pier as officers led him away in handcuffs, her father's name whispered somewhere among the charges being read aloud, justice finally, impossibly, within reach after so many months of grief and deception. Damon found her there moments later, Claire safely wrapped in a blanket nearby, and pulled Elena into his arms without a single word needed between them. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's over," she repeated, and for the first time since her father's death, she believed it completely. The weeks that followed Victor Doyle's arrest passed in a strange, quiet blur, the kind of stillness that only comes after a long and exhausting storm has finally broken. The formal charges against him grew heavier with each passing day as investigators worked through the ledger's contents, uncovering not only the fraud that had funded his rise, but concrete evidence tying him directly to the night Walter Marsh had died, a payment made to a man who had since fled the city, a payment traced, eventually, to an account that could only have been Victor's own. Elena sat beside Damon in a small, quiet courtroom, the day the connection was formally read into the record, her father's name spoken aloud, not as a victim of accident, but as a man murdered for uncovering the truth. She had expected the moment to bring only grief, and it did, fresh and sharp even months after his death. But beneath the grief, she found something else waiting as well, a settling, a sense that the story of her father's life had finally been given its proper ending, honest and complete. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, drawn by the scale of the scandal and the improbable story behind its unraveling, a mafia marriage that had somehow become the very thing that exposed a decade of hidden crime. Damon kept Elena close through the crowd, his hand steady at the small of her back, shielding her from the worst of the noise, as they made their way to the waiting car. "They're going to write all kinds of things about us," Elena said, once they were finally alone inside, the city sliding past the windows in the early evening light. "Let them," Damon said. "None of it changes what actually happened between us." Elena looked over at him, at the man she had married intending to destroy, who had instead become the person who had helped her uncover the truth she had spent months chasing alone. So much had shifted since that first walk down the aisle, the careful distance between them dissolved entirely, replaced by something neither of them had expected to find in a marriage built on secrets and suspicion. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly, "now that it's over. Now that the promise to Edward has been kept, and Victor is gone, and there's no more danger circling us, why are you still here? What happens now that neither of us has to stay?" Damon turned to face her fully, his expression softer than she had ever seen it, stripped of the careful control he had worn like armor since the day they first met. "I'm here because somewhere between protecting a promise and uncovering the truth about your father, I stopped seeing you as an obligation, and started seeing you as the reason I wanted to come home every night." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "The promise to Edward is finished, Elena. Whatever happens between us now, happens because we choose it, not because either of us owes it to someone else." Elena felt the weight of months of grief and deception finally lift from her chest, replaced by something she had not allowed herself to hope for since her father's death, the possibility of a future built on honesty rather than revenge, on partnership rather than plotting. "I chose to marry you for the wrong reasons," she admitted softly. "I want the chance to choose you again, for the right ones." The wedding they held 3 months later bore no resemblance to the hurried, guarded ceremony that had first bound them together. This time, the church filled with people who had earned their place there, Claire standing proudly beside her brother, Nathan and Grace seated together near the front, staff from the estate who had come to know Elena not as a stranger to be watched, but as family to be welcomed. Sunlight poured through the windows in a way it had not on that first cold morning, and when Damon slid the ring onto Elena's finger a second time, his hand did not tremble with guilt or hidden grief. It was steady, certain, and entirely his own. Elena carried a small photograph in her bouquet that day, tucked carefully among the flowers where only she knew it rested. A picture of her father, young and smiling, standing beside a man named Edward Voss in front of a building that no longer existed. Two friends, whose loyalty to each other had, against every impossible odd, brought their children's futures together in a way neither of them could have imagined. As Elena and Damon exchanged their vows for the second time, freely chosen and honestly meant, she thought of the promise that had started it all, a dying man's final request, kept faithfully across years of quiet sacrifice, and finally, fully, transformed into something neither loss, nor deception, nor danger could ever take away again. A love built not on obligation, but on truth. Outside the church, the city moved on around them, unaware of the quiet war that had been fought and won within these walls, unaware of the debt finally settled, the promise finally honored. But inside, surrounded by the people who had helped them find their way to this moment, Elena Marsh, now Elena Calloway for the second and final time, understood that some stories did not end where they seemed destined to, that revenge, followed far enough, could lead a person not to destruction, but to the very thing they never knew they were searching for all along. The end.